Today's podcast is the first in a three-part series with Polyvagal Theory experts, all of whom are members of the Polyvagal Institute and all of whom I met in person at a recent Polyvagal Institute conference. And we begin with Paul North. Paul is an author and principal psychologist at his practice PartnershipsPlus, based in Canberra, Australia. Yes, he made the trip to Florida all the way from Australia. Paul was the inaugural chair of the Restrictive Practice Panel for the Senior Practitioner ACT. Paul has over 35 years of experience in the disability sector. Having also worked with children in out-of-home care and past and serving veterans, Paul is passionate about reducing suffering and mental illness by enhancing health and well-being. Paul is an early adopter and constantly reviews the literature on trauma treatments and the leading evidence-based techniques for helping people recover and thrive in the world at large. And this is where polyvagal theory and also the Safe and Sound protocol developed by Professor Stephen Porges come into play. Paul is a tour de force during this podcast. He really teaches us all how he utilizes and helps his clients benefit from polyvagal theory, though without using jargon or terminology. This is a really simple explanation of nervous system behavior and the way human beings interact in the world. We talk about Paul's book, Safe and Sound, a story of a little girl who overcomes fear, and also about what's next for Paul and the resources he's planning to help parents and teachers support our children and young ones with nervous system regulation. This is a fascinating and also supremely useful conversation if you are a human being with a nervous system, which is everyone listening to this. I truly hope you enjoy this conversation with Paul North. So I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Paul North to the podcast today. And we met at the Polyvagal Institute conference. We were just saying like a whole 2 months ago, and yet feels like about 5 seconds. But I get the wonderful opportunity of digging into Paul's history and work and everything today. And it's another great accent on the podcast, which is awesome. And I really want to start by introducing you to our listeners, Paul. So why don't you just, for the 30,000 foot view of who you are and what you do, can you share with the Unveiled podcast listeners how you serve?
Isn't that a beautiful question to actually ask how another human being serves fellow beings, humanity? And that even that question means something to me, because every day before I start, even before I came on this podcast, I have like this little internal prayer / mantra where I ask God / the universe to help me serve, to help me be a perfect instrument, whatever that is, of love, light, and wisdom, compassion. Because I don't want to take my stuff into the session. I want to try and be as empty and as free-flowing as possible when I sit with a person who's suffering. So how did I get to this place? That's a podcast just in itself.
That's what we're here for. You have a whole podcast to talk about it.
In essence, I think I've lived about 3 different lifetimes in the one lifetime. And maybe that's because I'm just bringing a whole bunch of lifetimes to their natural conclusion, tying up a few loose ends, so to speak. But in essence, I've been a psychologist for a very long time, probably about 35 plus years now. I had a background as an elite athlete. I was a nationally ranked junior tennis player. And from that perspective, I've always had this interest to push the human condition forward to its ultimate potential. It's like I once had an opportunity to speak with Pete Sampras when he was number 1 in the world, and I said, "Have you reached your potential?" And it was like no, like who knows what your potential is, right? You can always keep polishing, always keep learning, refining just a little bit. And even though the majority of my career was actually working with developmental disabilities and autism and kids who are, if in a way, at the lower end of the bell curve, they've all got untapped potential. And so whether you're working with the top 0.5% of the world, of the elite athletes, in that bell curve of human exceptional endeavor, or kids that are just trying to find their way, it's the same thing. It's about actually trying to maximize a person's potential, helping them to be and achieve just a little bit more, to be a little bit better. And a lot of that process involves reducing suffering. And so really I started off my career in very heavy duty, what we call fifth schedule hospital systems. These are the terrible old hospital systems, the old days where when a parent had a child with an intellectual disability, they were encouraged to just pop them away into the institution and start life again. And it was a culture shock for me because I was pretty brand new and pretty green. And didn't know, and I'd grown up in a white picket fence world. I mean, my life wasn't terribly challenging. All the challenges and the traumas that I had were actually in the tennis world as an elite athlete,
Yeah.
where it's a very skewed world where everything revolves around how good you are. It's remarkable how many friends you have when you're actually successful, and how those friends evaporate when you're not, or you get an injury or something goes wrong. So that was the level of life experience that I entered this world of intense suffering. It was confronting,
Yeah.
but I adapted, I evolved, and I worked my way through that field
Mm.
to eventually work into community settings. And then after about some 10 years in that game, I decided one day that, and the universe decided because I received a phone call about working on some software. I mean, here I am, a psychologist,
Mhm.
working on some software to do with sport. And I ignored that knock at the door several times until finally it got too loud. And I did. I ended up leaving my job as a psychologist. And I spent 5 years on the international tennis circuit, both the ATP men's and the WTA women's, um, working with some of the best people in the world. In relation to a piece of software that does what's called charting. What it does is it actually you study the income the outcomes of particular points, and you work out what people's strengths and weaknesses are, because human beings are kind of predictable. When they go under stress, they revert back to patterns.
Yeah.
Well, in tennis, if you know what that pattern is, if you know where a person serves when they're under stress, you can be there waiting for it. And so we and we did it. We developed a software program that ran on, in those days, the Apple Newton. And
Wow.
I lived a crazy life. I literally was traveling around the world. I met with Gil Amelio. I was one of 20 people in Australia that met with Gil Amelio when he came to Australia. We developed the Apple Newton Product of the Year. I was invited to Cupertino. I went into the inner sanctum. That's a crazy place.
Wow.
Um, and I had an amazing time. We made a difference in the world of tennis.
Mhm.
But then Steve Jobs came back into the world,
Mhm.
killed off the Newton. And at that stage, I had an office in Pitt Street in Sydney, part of a company called Newton World.
Mm.
When Steve Jobs killed off the Newton, all the Newton developers, we went to the wall. We went bankrupt. We lost everything.
Wow.
I went from literally looking at a Lamborghini and a jet. I'd done some calculations on what Agassi was spending on his jet.
Oh.
Because at that stage, I had a heads of agreement with the US Tennis Association to put our software right across the US.
Mhm. Oh, wow.
Right? It was big. Every tennis coach in America was going to be using it. And I had discussions with the ATP too. Every coach, every umpire was going to be using it to chart and collect the data, score the match.
Mhm.
The concept was crazy. Um, and we lost it all. I literally lost everything. And I ended up working as a truckies offsider in a truck for $10 an hour.
Wow.
The best we could do was live on like honey sandwiches and sausages from the supermarket.
Mhm.
And I got a call. Hi, we've got a vacancy at St George Hospital. One of our clin psychs has gone on maternity leave. Would you like to like fill the spot? I'll be there tomorrow.
Yes. Yep.
So I went back into psychology and worked and eventually that was working in a pediatric developmental unit. So that's a team of pediatricians, psychologists, social workers,
Mhm.
speech pathologists,
Mhm.
OTs. Like it's a multidisciplinary team. It's the gold
Mhm.
standard of actually providing assessment and care for little kids that have got difficulties.
Mhm.
And working in a top level Sydney hospital over that 10 years, I would have yayed and nayed more than 2,000 kids with autism and every other amazing and crazy difference that occurs in human presentation.
Mm.
And so I got to meet and work with a lot of beautiful people.
Mm.
It was just after I finished that job in that hospital
Mm-hmm.
that I actually had the blessing of meeting Steve Porges. So Professor Porges, he's the inventor, the development of what's called the Polyvagal Theory. I was down at Darling Harbour, it was 2011, and I was listening to him speak, and I had tears in my eyes, and
Mm.
tears like that are often tears of truth.
Yeah.
You know, there's a part of you that kind of just knows that this
Yeah.
is the real deal.
Yeah.
And the light bulb went on because I had
Mm.
seen so many kids over those years with autism who had these
Mm.
auditory hypersensitivities,
Mm-hmm.
and everything that he was talking about just made sense. It was like this amazing aha. My life changed. My whole therapy practice changed. I practically went on a quest then to actually understand this and then teach others about it.
Mm.
Um, so he's really responsible for the most significant shift in my clinical application of my psychological skill set. Beyond
Mm.
that, he helped me to redefine myself in terms of the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
It also aligned with my own spiritual journeys
Mm.
because we're so much more than a box of inputs and outputs.
Mm.
And unfortunately, having grown up in the Western white paternalistic mental health model
Mm.
of cognitive behavior therapy, um, it was so refreshing to
Mm.
actually have something that acknowledged a far greater physiology and presence,
Mm-hmm.
and this endeavor to try and feel safe and connect,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not this Pavlovian model of inputs and outputs, and who cares what happens in the middle,
Right.
you know, and
Mm.
this arrogance that assumes that the mind can control everything.
Mm.
I promise you, if the captain of your plane says, folks, we're going in for a crash landing, you can think about all the fluffy bunnies that you're like, your body's going to freak it. It's going to freak out.
Yes, and so it should. That's the
And
whole
so
thing.
it should. And
Yes.
until you acknowledge that and learn to work with this brilliant body
Mm.
that just wants to keep you alive,
Mm-hmm.
then you're missing a massive chunk of the drivers of human suffering.
Mm.
So that was 2011. From there, I went on to then work in various different government departments
Mm-hmm.
in Australia until it became time to not work for the government. Let's just put it that way.
Enough said.
And then move into private practice and
Yeah.
actually be my own boss. And I mean, there's some wonderful things in working in government, but it's also very, very risk averse,
Mm-hmm.
very controlling.
Mm.
So they struggled with something like Safe and Sound because it's new, because it's
Mm-hmm.
innovative, because it's pushing the envelope.
Mm-hmm.
Governments like to look back at things which are 20 years old and just use the old style stuff and move along at a snail's pace. And
Mm-hmm.
it's can be terribly frustrating. So in private practice, you get a lot more freedom to explore and actually be authentic,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's so critical to being able to have good therapeutic rapport.
Yeah.
You know, no one wants to sit in front of somebody who's BSing or doesn't believe or hasn't walked
Yeah.
their talk.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Who hasn't walked their talk?
Mm. Yeah, and that's so essential when you come to polyvagal theory and think of the ventral vagal kind of humaningness thing. Like your
Mm,
authenticity really matters when you're coming to like actually being with another human in their stuff. And so it's
yeah.
kind of really essential that you don't have to operate through a framework that doesn't resonate with you.
Oh, look, and this is so true because see, the thing is, when you work with people who've been traumatized,
Mm-hmm.
they're actually extra good at seeing BS.
Yes. You
And
can
and I
swear, by the
remember,
way.
I,
This is a swearable podcast. Yes.
I,
But yeah, they really
I
are.
just I remember working with a young boy who was 14, out of home care, big trauma history, a
Mm.
lot of interactions with police. We were sitting in a government building, looking at a big glass, government building, so beautiful, lots of money, right?
Yeah.
Big glass panes, looking out onto the street below, and he suddenly makes a comment, this unmarked car, he says, that's a cop car. I said, really? How do you know? He says, I know the way it changed lanes and how it moves through the traffic. And I swear to God, about 15 seconds later, before it was out of sight, it put a flashing light on the roof,
Yeah.
chucked the Yui and sped off down the street. Said, see?
Wow.
And another time I was sitting with him and I said, it's so unfair. I can't tell if you're lying. You're so good at this. And then he looks at me and goes, yeah, okay, I was lying. Because lying is adaptive.
Yeah.
So these kids are really good. People with trauma are really good at actually having protective behaviors, at reading other people,
Mm-hmm.
at knowing whether they're successful or not in surviving in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're sitting with someone who's had some really bad things happening, if
Mm-hmm.
you're not authentic, they
Mm-hmm.
feel it. They pick it up in your face,
Mm-hmm.
in your expressions, in your voice, in your breathing patterns,
Yeah.
in the way you're sitting. They might not even fully understand why, but they're damn good at it.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah.
we're back to now this vagal nervous system, which is absolutely designed to keep you alive in a scary jungle,
Mm-hmm.
to seek out safety and to protect you from threat. I mean, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just saying earlier, like you are the first person to speak about polyvagal theory on this, like this show at all, because it's so obvious to me when I, like you, I'll just share my brief Steve Porges story because I think it's relevant and it speaks to yours as well. I found Stephen Porges in around 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Watershed moment for me as well. I was still in my illness. I was still really struggling and I was still really suffering. And I read something that he'd put out there and I was like, oh, that makes more sense as to what I'm actually going through because I was witnessing the difference of the parasympathetic nervous system and the dorsal vagal and on the whole thing. And I was like, oh, so for me, the personal watershed moment of actually finally realizing, finally feeling seen by someone in my complexity of responses and not just being the like inputs and outputs, as you so beautifully said. And I really feel like love the work that Stephen Porges has done to bring polyvagal theory into bigger kind of repute, if you like, because it really does matter that we're not seeing this as kind of, rudimentary elements, but also seeing it as we've said a couple of times already, these survival instincts are appropriate. They are appropriate
Yes.
responses from the organism under duress, even if the adaptation pattern seems negative as a consequence. So
Yes.
I'd love for you to just speak a little bit to polyvagal theory and kind of give us either give us an education in it, give us the top level view, however you want to sort of frame it so that we can get a bit more into SSP, which you've mentioned and we'll talk about, and then some more of the work you've done. So let's start with polyvagal theory and exploring that a little bit.
Yeah. So as you've already mentioned, there are these terms, ventral vagal and dorsal vagal, which are all fine, but even to the regular person, I actually don't emphasize that too much.
Right.
I like to actually build it onto what we call the triune brain, which is actually Dan Siegel does a lot of beautiful work.
Yeah.
All right. Because I think people, when you're sitting with people who are just doing other non-medical jobs,
Right.
getting into the medical terminology adds just one extra layer of complexity. And that could be enough to just make that person pause a bit. But if I talk about a brain and I divide it into three,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the brain sitting on top of the spine,
Yeah.
and I keep it fairly straightforward, people start to get it straight away. And yet, this vagal nerve is running through and creating the inputs into these parts of the brain and determining which part of the brain you're in.
Yeah.
So in essence, what I like to do is actually talk about there's three parts, and this bottom part of the brain, this most primitive part of the brain. And I must actually just further clarify. In the literature now, we're going to a 4-part brain, but for therapy and for general instruction, a triune brain works really, really
Works
good.
perfectly. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So this bottom part of the brain, this
Mm-hmm.
reptilian brain, this part that we share with reptiles,
Yeah.
okay, which is pretty much responsible for eating, sleeping, and pooping. It's not terribly sophisticated. But the thing we're interested in from a polyvagal perspective is how does this part of the brain deal with scary stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And it deals with scary stuff by going into what is called in polyvagal theory this freeze response, or this shutdown. And a really good example of that is when a cat goes and starts playing with a mouse, and the mouse goes limp.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and the cat might get bored and walk off, and then the mouse comes back to life and runs off. All right, so that's a freeze response, and mammals can do it, but we can't do it for very long, because in essence we've got these big brains that require lots of oxygen. And so we can only stay in that state for a short period of time. But reptiles, they can stay in it for ages. You might have even seen on wildlife shows where an alligator or crocodile could stay underwater for like an hour waiting for prey to come and then get it. And they can do that because they've got tiny little brains. Okay, so we share this brain, and this is part of our evolution, but it's our most primitive one. And it has the most primitive, but also brilliant threat management protocols. Okay. This next part of the brain, which developed over time, which we'll just call the mammalian brain, it's got a lot more sophisticated features in it. But the things that really interest us is, how does it deal with threat? And see, it has this thing. It's got this thing called an amygdala. So let's even just call it a smoke detector. All right, it's an alarm system. Right?
Yes.
And I can't. That's again, this is Dan Siegel. But the thing is, that smoke detector should only go off if the house catches on fire, right? Which is pretty uncommon, right? Really. However, if you've had trauma or some scary bad things have happened to you, we can see on a brain scan that amygdala, that smoke detector, is bigger and more sensitive. That's a problem, because then it's like the smoke detector that goes off every time it cooks toast. Like it's going off pretty much every day. That's a problem, because when that goes off, it drags you into this middle part of the brain where the predominant mechanism for dealing with danger or scary things is your fight or flight response. All right, so now we're back to our sympathetic aspect of the vagal nervous system. Now, males are slightly more predisposed to fight first, or get angry and then flight. Females are slightly more predisposed to flight to other females and then get angry, but we both do both, really. Also in this part of the brain is where you store your most beautiful memories and your scary memories. And in these parts of the brain down here, these bottom parts, there's no sense of time. And this is why clinicians would be really, really better served, and the clients that they look after, to not talk about trauma in the first session. Because when you talk about trauma in the first session, you activate this part of the brain which has no sense of time. And that's a problem, because then the person becomes dysregulated. The session ends and they leave the room in a worse place than when they entered in. So I actually have a rule when people come in, unless people are busting to tell me, you don't have to tell me a damn thing about yourself on the first session.
But I want to do it. It's like, please let me share my trauma history.
Well, in actual fact, Victoria, what I've found is people sigh. They have a great sense of relief, because, see, all brains, again, we're back to polyvagal theory, all brains perceive new situations as dangerous until that situation proves otherwise. So meeting a new mammal, I'm a new mammal. I got a referral to this guy. They don't know anything about me. I might have Googled a bit. I'm a new mammal. Their brain is doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to have some level of threat management, sussing me out. People should never talk about trauma until they feel safe. All right? So the first session is a terrible time to talk about trauma, but so many psychiatrists, psychologists, GPs, first responders, police tell us what happened. And the poor person has to reinvigorate these neural circuits, and they get dysregulated. Because this is the thing, your brain can't tell the difference between what's real and imagined. As soon as you go to that sexual assault or that terrible, scary, bad thing that happened 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you're there. Your neurophysiology is there. And you're trying to manage all of that while you talk to this new mammal. So trauma-informed care is about, let's just remove that pressure. If you want to tell me, you have my full blessings, but you're under no obligation to tell me a damn thing. I also tell people not to believe a damn thing I say.
Right.
Go and check it out.
Yeah, go and experiment.
Okay? Become I want people to be their own master. Their own, empowered by their knowledge. So the first session is teaching. It's just, let's sit down and have a look. Let's have a discussion about, why is your body betraying you? Well, my body betrays me. Yeah, it does. You didn't wake up in the morning and said, today I want to have a panic attack. That'd be cool. No, you, you went to work. You tried to do a really good presentation in front of very powerful mammals. One of them looked at you sideways and sighed and had a negative expression. And suddenly you got brain fog. Your body broke out into a sweat. Your heart started to beat faster.
Mm.
And you were freaking out and you didn't want that to happen. That's not your fault. And as soon as you actually have that discussion, then tears often come.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've now, and this is this is the other power of polyvagal theory, it obliterates shame.
Right.
All right? This history of psychology and psychopathology has been so much about shame.
Mm-hmm.
Well, mister, did you do your CBT exercises? Well, no, I didn't. More shame. More shame.
Mm-hmm.
I'll come back to that. I just want to
Right.
get through to this top part of this brain,
Yeah,
right? So
top
this
part,
middle
right.
part,
Mm-hmm.
all right? So these two parts, no time. This top part has all your higher functions. We're using it now, all right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were playing a musical instrument, doing something mathematical, learning a second language,
Mm-hmm.
using a map, all this higher stuff that the human beings do. And you also have your highest level of your threat management mechanisms, okay, to keep you safe. So for example, your intuition. This is your creep meter. And this is now we're back to this vagal network again. And we're back to the ventral vagal, we're actually the more sophisticated part of this, which reaches up into this front part of the brain and connects you to your eyes, your ears, your mouth. I mean, the vagal nerve connects to everything, but let's just go there, like the throat, back of the heart, and your gut. And in its most simplistic form, this is why people get sick to the stomach and they have gut feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting chewed out by a neuropsych back in my diagnostic days when I was back at St George Hospital. We had a split decision of the whole team on this child with autism. And I said, look, my gut feeling tells me this child's going to go on to develop autism. Wow, she read the riot act to me. She said, there is no such thing. That's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard. I mean, she was really hammered me. She said, how dare you use intuition as part of your diagnostic criteria?
Wow.
The child did go on to develop autism.
Yeah.
Because you have this beautiful, amazing body that's taking in all the information, even the information that you don't fully understand. It feels into the situation, whether that's danger or you're meeting a new person who you think, oh, I might like to have a second date. What is it? Oh, yeah, it feels really good. So this body's always checking stuff out. And so, I wish I could bump back into that stuffed shirt psychologist and say, oh, well, as a matter of fact, we've since discovered that there's this mechanism and it actually is true.
Yeah.
I know. It's crazy. So we've got intuition is one of these higher level threat management things. Time lives in the top part of this brain. That's insight. If I do this now based on history, I can predict that this will happen. For adolescents, it's not terribly good until you get to around maybe your mid-20s, 24, 25.
Yeah.
Kids, adolescents lack insight because they lack the capacity to actually reference time and space. Okay, and so they make errors. They make errors in endeavoring to explore the world. So here's the kicker. Going back to polyvagal theory, right? So we've got this beautiful vagal nerve connecting into these different parts of the brain. The part of the brain that you end up in when you're presented with a stress, which doesn't have to be a man with a club, it could be a text, it could be a Facebook post, it could be an email, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The thing that determines where you end up is your trauma history and the trauma history of your parents and grandparents and probably beyond. And this is your epigenetics. And epigenetics is so cool. And of course, I'm not a biologist. I can't really do justice to the complexities of epigenetics, but in essence, if we think about it like software that can be upgraded instantaneously every day of your life, that has the decision-making tree of the on-off of your hardware system, or another way to think about it is the electrical wiring in the wall, and the epigenetic profile is the light switches. Are they on or off? And so you have a scary bad thing that happens when you're 16, and one of those light switches which has jurisdiction over your attentional focus switches on.
Mm-hmm.
So you adaptively become more hypervigilant.
Mm.
Well, that over the fullness of weeks, that epigenetic shift in your signaling gets encoded onto your eggs and sperm.
Mm.
And that gets passed. If you have a baby, then like 10 years later, 20 years later,
Mm-hmm.
that information gets passed on.
Mm-hmm.
That shift in regulation.
Yeah.
But here's the beautiful thing. If you do some work with some beautiful, compassionate clinicians and therapists, and you get a few things sorted out, you process that trauma, you integrate it, your body changes again, your epigenetic profile changes again. It learns from that. You pass the learning on.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're back to this beautiful, what is the gift of trauma? I say to people, trauma is a gift. And they look at me, I say, well, when you're going through it, it's terrible, it's a bitch, it's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other side, when you have expanded understanding and insight, you create this expanded sense of compassion.
Mm.
And imagine passing that epigenetic profile onto your kids.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And this is how we start to break into generational trauma, by working with younger people and young adults.
Yeah.
So the goal of therapy, the goal of polyvagal theory, is to get you in the top part of your brain, to activate your ventral vagal system, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Which, to get you feeling safe, because that's the essence of this therapy.
Yeah.
In fact, everything revolves around that statement. Am I safe?
Mm.
And if you can help another human being feel safe, you get the best out of them.
Mm.
And that's why I just go back to that comment I said about sometimes clinicians will give a client a bit of a look down the nose if they haven't done their homework.
Yeah.
Well, when they were angry and they were supposed to do their breathing or their counting or their thinking of fluffy bunnies,
Mm-hmm.
this top part of the brain was off. It was disconnected. You were no longer in your ventral vagal.
Mm-hmm.
You were down here. This is not your fault.
Mm. Mm.
Your brain didn't even remember the conversation that you had with a psychologist because you're in the cozy clinic having a cup of tea. You're up here.
Yeah.
You're in freak out mode.
Yeah.
You don't need to do trigonometry or quote Shakespeare when you're in the middle part of the brain, when you're running away from the wolves. You can still swear. That's to
Right.
tell other mammals about danger, right?
Yeah.
But there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing terribly sophisticated down here.
Mm-mm.
So you forget your homework.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, when you come back to the clinician's office or the doctor's office, you're up here and you've got to take responsibility for that.
Right. It's
more
so
more
funny.
shame.
Yeah, well, and it's so funny because coming from the functional medicine perspective, I would always get clients in my office like, oh, I'm really feeling shame that I didn't eat the diet that I'd recommended, or and I'm like,
Yeah.
that I always approach that with curiosity. It's like, this is not a problem. This is information. Like, there's a reason
Yeah.
you didn't do it. Let's understand why you didn't do it rather than actually
100%.
spend any time wasted in the shame.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. See, your brain allocates as much resources to shame as it does to being stabbed by a knife.
Wow, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. Why is that? Because historically we've all been part of tribes, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So as an individual in the jungle, we're not very powerful. Like we don't have big claws and fangs. But as a tribe, we're super powerful.
Yeah.
Now, if you do a bad thing, shame, I am bad, and the tribe rejects you,
Mm-hmm.
you're toast. You're going to get eaten by bears and lions and scary things.
Mm-hmm.
So shame, for your brain, evolutionarily, from that perspective, your brain allocates significant resources to
Yeah.
being socially acceptable,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Get with the program, man.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
and now the social groups are so vast because we don't just have our little tribe, we have the entire global population on social media. So now shame is like universal as well as everything else.
Absolutely. And again, shame drops you down you're back in survival mode.
Mm.
All right. Now, shame is a terrible motivator. And yeah, we've pretty much all been we've had it thrown at us.
Yeah.
People are doing, it's at school, for example, with boys in PE, they're doing push-ups. They can't quite do enough. The instructor will say stupid things like, oh, my grandma can do more than that and she's dead. And all the boys laugh and the kid feels terrible. Now,
Mhm.
for a little while, that shame makes that person try a little bit harder.
Right.
Okay, because again, it's fear-based, right?
Yeah.
But then they desensitize to it, and then they shut down, and then they avoid. That's adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a terrible motivator.
Yeah.
When I started going back to CrossFit, oh my God, a few years ago, right? Because I'm like, I'm like 59. So when I was in my early 50s, no one told me that you actually have to go to 7 other gyms and get fit before you go to CrossFit. I just turned
No,
up.
yeah, no.
Get
Yeah.
fit before you go to CrossFit. Anyway,
Do, yes.
and it was a really interesting experience because I rationalized that I was actually doing a good thing, because by coming last every time, I was actually helping other people to not feel so bad.
Yes.
All right, that's how I stayed in there. I did
Right.
get better, actually. I did get fitter. That's true.
Mm.
But I actually had to have a conversation with a young lady one time, because everybody's like 20s and 30s there, right? I'm like this old dude, and she was shaming me. We were on the rower, and she was shaming me, and I stopped rowing, and I gave her a bit of a lesson in polyvagal theory. And I said, "Listen,
Of course you did,
listen."
Paul.
I said, "Listen, it's really not helpful. Like, you're in the peak of your life. A lot of people around here are super fit. I really want to do my best, and you shaming me is actually demotivating. So let's try something different. Just talk to my strengths, and I'll do better, and I'll endure better, because part
Mm.
of me won't be wanting to pack my bags and go home."
Right.
Okay, but shame is such a big thing in society, and people use it all the time, and
Mm.
it's like a weapon,
Right.
because it's hurting.
Mm.
It's inflicting suffering upon this autonomic nervous system
Mm-hmm.
that's trying to survive in a scary and unpredictable world.
Mm.
So we're back to the beauty of polyvagal theory. When people understand that their bodies betray them,
Mm.
that it's not just a matter of just get over your depression, just pull your socks up, just stiff up. When they learn that their body is trying to help them survive, it might not be socially appropriate, running out
Right.
of the room,
Yeah.
getting angry,
Mm-hmm.
but it's doing its best.
Yeah.
Then we actually get rid of shame,
Mm.
and this is a beautiful gift to give people, because then
Mm.
the whole therapeutic environment softens.
Mm.
Safety is starting to come online,
Mhm.
and we can start to begin this exploration of this person's journey,
Yeah.
and then do something with them to help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking of that, what do you actually do in your office with your clients to help? What are the methods and modalities that you use? Because this has been a really phenomenal explanation in the theory, and I really would love to understand a bit more about how you work directly with your clients.
Yeah. So first of all, we go through some psychoeducation. So it's about teaching them why does your body do these things.
Mm.
Okay. Then what I like to do is I like to teach them the relationship between their breathing and their heart. So a lot of people bang on about breathing, but they never explain why.
Mm-hmm.
And then people don't do it. They say,
Mm-hmm.
like, I've worked with defense personnel who are war warriors, like they've seen action.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk about just breathing, they'll claim that you're just talking about tree hugging hippie shit, right? It's just bullshit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
No, that's a direct quote, by the way.
I can imagine. Yes, I've
All right,
interviewed Navy SEALs, and that fully tracks.
all right.
Yeah.
But when I actually get out the computer and I use heart math, okay, and I actually measure their heart rate variability, and I show them
Mm-hmm.
that their breathing has a direct relationship with the way their heart works, they go,
Mm-hmm.
whoa. So the first thing, and I just find this is helpful for people, let's take the mystery out of it. This is your body. You
Mm-hmm.
actually have some capacity to influence once you understand the neural hacks.
Yeah.
And breathing is a neural hack. Now, again, going back to polyvagal theory, because it was actually Steve talking about breathing that got me interested in this thing called heart rate variability.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to understand, oh my God, it's critical
Yeah.
to everything.
Yeah.
So it becomes the very first thing I measure with people to see whether they've got
Right.
protective levels or they've got dysfunctional levels. And
Mm.
most people with trauma are really they're either very much down the low scale, so their heart rate variability is poor, which means their parasympathetic nervous system or their braking system is tired,
Mm-hmm.
worn out from. And so often people have like a Ferrari accelerator and push brake brakes, like push push bike brakes.
Mm-hmm.
They've got very small capacity to calm down the power of the anxiety in the system.
Yeah.
But then on the other end of the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
because too much parasympathetic is a bad thing too. You see people who have been depressed for a long time, their body's exhausted, the accelerator's exhausted, and now they're parasympathetically dominant.
Mm-hmm.
We want to, and that's really helpful to know, because it's like, oh my God, I've got no energy, I'm chronically fatigued. And it's like, yeah, look at this. Your brakes are on all the time. No wonder you want to just stay in your cave. Right? Now, this starts to go hand in hand with metabolic challenges. All right? Right? But I'm a psychologist, I can't talk about that. So what I always do is I say, listen, I'm just a signpost. Again, don't believe a damn thing I say, just go and have a look at some stuff. Because you live in a body, your consciousness is traveling around in this body. If we don't have the body on side, it's going to be a bit of a tougher journey. All right, because let's just chuck the mind over matter stuff out. You're not Gandalf. All right, you've really got to actually be. This is a team effort.
Right.
And so I asked them, for example, how much coffee do you drink? Like, how much stimulants do you have? Right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, as they endeavor to stay in their window of tolerance, they wake up in the morning and they're tired. Well, I've got to go to work and perform. If I don't perform, I might lose my job. I'm not safe. So to stay safe, I drink my coffee. Maybe it's a double macchiato. I'm loading it up, right? And so that gets me through to maybe 11 o'clock. And then maybe I'm having another one. Then I'm getting through to the afternoon, but I've still got to be on my A game, because the boss is checking what I'm up to. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll be going for maybe some more caffeine and some sugar, but I'm doing stuff to keep my energy levels up. But then I get home at the end of the day and I'm too pumped. I'm too amped up from all the stuff I've been not only doing, all the stuff I've been consuming and drinking, and the energy drinks. And it is really interesting when you talk to people about, what do you have? Oh, well, actually, I have like 3 or 4 coffees. Some of the people I work with have like 6 and 7, right? So then what I do when I get home, in my endeavor to feel safe, because I need to get some sleep, is I reach for alcohol or weed. All right, because I want to bring myself down, because I'm too up here. My window of tolerance is here. This is where I feel good. This is where I feel safe. I've got to get to sleep now. I've got to come down. But of course, alcohol screws up my sleep patterns. So then I wake up tired, and then it's rinse and repeat. So I invite them to start looking at what is their diet like? What is their intake? What is their metabolism like? Because again, a lot of people that I see are carrying additional weight, right? Because that's been part of their adaptive mechanism. For example, if we go to food, we know that vagal nerve is connected into your mouth. The very first time every human being self-regulates when they cry is on mum's breast or a bottle. The movement of the mouth helps the nervous system to feel safe. Once again, when you're sitting with somebody who's carrying some excess weight, and you say to them, it's not your fault. Your body's just doing its best to self-regulate. I know you're not hungry. I know you don't want to have those things. I've been there. Look at us in COVID. I kept going to the fridge. I kept going to the cupboard. I wasn't hungry. I was trying to self-regulate, right? I was doing my best, right, to stay safe in a scary jungle. So again, I start to weave polyvagal theory into just the stuff of life, right? And then maybe it's helpful for them to then go and get some more specialized advice, or to do their own research. Okay, because having just finished Chris Palmer's, he's a Harvard psychiatrist, he just wrote a book called Brain Energy. All right, it just got released in November. I just finished it. He's talking all about metabolism as the root cause of mental health. Right, that's a big thing for a psychiatrist, right? Okay. But he's right, that's the big component of the equation. As I said, I could bang on all day about positive thoughts, and it will help. But if you want an integrated human being who is mastering the suffering of the world that they encounter, the body's got to be functioning as well. And if it's metabolically challenged through living on potato chips and chocolates and Coca-Cola, it's just not going to happen. And so we've got to help people to actually connect that when people talk about, food and stuff, it actually does matter.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we've got to look at your carbohydrate consumption. So I say to them, I say, listen, especially if they're getting into the late, maybe, well, actually, it depends on their body profile. But it's like, do you know what your blood sugars are like?
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, I don't. Well, you know what? That's a really good idea to go and find out, because if they're elevated, you can do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's going to help, because when your blood sugars are like high and you're getting pre-diabetic, that also has an impact on your mental health.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay. So there's that component.
Mm-hmm.
Then, so what we're doing is we're looking at just getting the body online. Then we're looking at actually then addressing the mind. And that's actually this thing. That's actually helping people to understand that while they don't have control over their thoughts, right? Thoughts can pop in for any reason whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Where their real power is what they do with those thoughts. And so most people spend their time oscillating between the past and the future. Because their brain can't tell any difference between what's real and imagined, when they're reliving that argument with their partner that happened 2 nights ago, or that event when they got bullied, for their body at 2 o'clock in the morning when they're trying to sleep, it's all happening all over again. And when they're in the future, because that's where they go, it's like, oh my God, I got to see her tomorrow. I'm going to tell her this. Oh, but what if she says that? So then anxiety comes, fear comes. They're in the future. And so it helps them to actually get their head around the fact that these thoughts are just that. And so then we're heading down the track of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, there's still people out there that teach mindfulness like a cookbook. They don't have a practice. They haven't sat. They haven't suffered with their mind over multiple hours and days trying to actually really become still. Understanding that you can only meditate when you feel safe. So some people introduce it way too early, and then it's, oh, I can't do that. Of course you can't do it if you're in a scary jungle. You've got domestic violence going on. You've got crazy things happening.
Yeah.
You've got to help the person feel safe first. So we're back to polyvagal theory.
Yeah.
And then we start to bring on these executive functions through mindfulness. But mindfulness is enhanced if you teach compassion.
Yes. Yes.
All right? Okay, so in the scientific world, they're always trying to reduce it. Hey, we got results after 10 sessions. Can we do it after 7? Can we do it after 4? Oh, we would save money if we did it after 3. So when they've looked at the research on just mindfulness, it does help, but it helps more if you teach compassion.
Right.
And then it gets really interesting if you add gratitude. Right? And that's because our brains, when we're sad and mad, we get very good at seeing all the bad stuff, all the dangerous stuff. Because again, if you're in a war zone, you want to see the negative stuff. But when you're going shopping,
yeah, less
you
important.
don't. That's right. But your body's wired that way. So we create opportunities for them to practice gratitude, to learn about compassion, that we're all imperfect beings. We all stuff up. And to come back to this present moment as much as they can. And I'm realistic. People say, oh, well, you must practice this for half an hour a day. And that's never going to happen. When you look at a bucket underneath a dripping tap, it gets there. All right? If you walk past the fridge every day and did 2 push-ups, you'll get there. So every time you remember, every time you look at your watch, every time you adjust, it pops in your head, oh, yeah, I should do that. Maybe your Apple Watch helps you. Just do a little bit. And a little bit gets a little bit more. And you start to notice that you feel just a little bit calmer when you become present. When you're not caught up with tomorrow, we'll deal with tomorrow when we get there.
Yeah.
And there's only so much I can do about that past. But right now, oh my God, I'm sitting here with this beautiful little kid. In fact, my daughter got married just 3 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And I got everybody. I gave the father's speech. Never miss an opportunity. I got them to literally pause. I said, "You've just finished your meal, but some of you are thinking about breakfast." And it's like you could see some of the faces going, "Oh my God, this guy is like a magician." How did he know I was thinking about breakfast? Some of you are thinking about when will these damn speeches finish and I can get up and dance or have another drink. And I said, we're so conditioned to be getting to the next carrot, the next thing. I said, and all of you here can make more money. You can all have another drink. You can find another dance. But this wedding, this moment in time, you can't make any more time. You can't get this moment back. I want you for the next 10 seconds to just sit there. Feel the hand of the person you're holding next to you. Look around. See the amazing venue. All your friends are here. Your family's here. Just drink it in. Just for 10 seconds, just drink it in. And then I stopped. And everybody looked around. And that was a gift. Because that actually will help them actually almost have like a timestamp of that moment. So I help people, that's the next stage, is to help them become present. Now, the beautiful thing about the brain is if you actually help it feel safe, about 40%, about 60% of the time when you help people feel safe, they fix themselves, right? You don't even need any trauma therapy after that, all right? Okay? Which is terrible news for psychologists. How will I make a living? You must need me.
Yeah.
You must need me. You know, I'm going to fix you. Well, that's a load of baloney. It's just not true. If we help people feel safe, 50% of the therapeutic relationship is just be nice to people, just validate their lived experience, sit in compassion with them, just that. So for the remainder, the 40% that do need some help, that have still got these intrusive thoughts, their neurophysiology is injured, terribly unsafe. That's when we use EMDR, which is a trauma treatment process. It stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, developed by Francine Shapiro in the 1990s. I'm so ancient, I was trained by her. We use that technique to help people process the trauma, to build the neural pathways, literally. And you can see within 72 hours following an EMDR session, should you have access to an MRI machine, you can see the new neural pathways forming. As people build connections between the parts of the brain where the trauma is stuck, and a lot of that's in the right hemisphere, because right hemisphere doesn't have any aspect of time. All right, so we have to build these aspects, these relationships. We do that in EMDR. It's a beautiful technique. It's not the only technique to deal with trauma, but the thing is, it works really well because it acknowledges the body. It has this cognitive and somatic component to it. You're inviting people to feel into their trauma. Where do you hold that in? Where do you feel it in your body? Now, that's a revolution for psychology back, in the days when it's like all up here. Because as Bessel van der Kolk so, correctly stated, the body keeps the score. It holds trauma. And people don't even realize how much trauma they're holding in their body from when they're a little kid and they got maybe strangled by some bully behind the school shed or something. It's there when they can't speak their truth. And when they build that aha through the therapeutic process with the left hemisphere, which knows that it's 2022 and this is the time, back to that little kid, which is in the right hemisphere, and they have that aha, and then that beautiful epigenetics kicks in. And BDNF, this beautiful, amazing neurotransmitter, gets released within minutes. Then over the next 72 hours, it facilitates neural connections forming. Then you get integration. And the person can remember that thing, but it no longer triggers them anymore. They no longer feel unsafe. That wounded child is now connected to the older, wiser adult that sits in this room. And you get shifts. And then these people, these beautiful beings go about their life now having experienced their suffering, learnt skills, how to manage their self-regulation, developed insights into what actually happened, and have now integrated and transcended it. So then when they're standing in the line at the shopping centre and the Christmas sales are on and the tension is around them, they can self-regulate. And then it's like, as Eckhart Tolle says, are you contributing, to the crap around you, or are you actually helping to settle it down and tie it up? In other words, your presence in that supermarket line can either be destabilizing or it can be calming. And so this is then the ripple effect. This is actually the gift that Stephen Porges, and I've said this to him and I've written emails to him to reinforce this, because it's his gift to the world is he's given an insight which allows clinicians and mums and dads and teachers to make the world a better place through the ripple effect of helping one person and then one more person and then one more person feel a bit safer. Because no act of kindness is ever wasted. It goes out into the world. And so I hope that my difference is in helping a person overcome their suffering, to gain insight into the human condition. You then get an expansion of consciousness, and then the impact that they have on the world, just through their family, just through their local community, facilitates that ripple effect of the change then in human consciousness. Because my God, Victoria, we need one on this planet.
Yes, we do. And I love all that you're sharing today. It's so simple at its essence, but really profound in what you're talking about. And it feels very much to me like people like yourself who really are champions for humans and consciousness, and the purity of what's underneath some of these trauma patterns is they're essential. And I love what you said about the fact that a lot of the time you don't need to do the trauma therapy work, but then there are these tools that are available as and when there is that need to do a bit more integration, a bit more processing work for the right brain to sort of reintegrate some of these things. And we did mention SSP, and there's two things I want to touch on before we close out for today. We mentioned SSP, and we are going to have to explain it for our listeners because I have not yet mentioned it on this podcast. And we were actually at a Polyvagal and SSP conference when we met. So why don't you explain to everyone what SSP is and how you are using it again in your practice?
Yeah.
And then I want to come on to the book that you've written. So those are the two topics I want to cover before we kind of reach conclusion today. But let's start with SSP and we'll go from there.
So yes, in fact, that was one of the moments in time in 2011 when Steve Porges showed a clip of a excuse me, a gentleman in his 40s with a background in autism, who was very stereotypical, very rigid, very flat affect in the face. And Steve showed how he was using this music over different sessions, and we saw 6 sessions. And by the end of these 6 sessions, we saw spontaneity return to this man. He had expression back in his face. He was able to engage in some conversation, and we just went, "Oh my gosh, what is this?" So we're getting early glimpses of this program that Steve had been working on. What he found is, in his studies, is that all mammals respond to certain frequencies in a particular way. We all respond to low, flat frequencies as predator. Think of a dog growl, that sort of sound, okay? Which is also the same sound that an angry man, angry women too, but angry man particularly, the voice lowers and flattens. When you hear that low, flat frequency, you can't not help but drop into your sympathetic, this middle part of the brain, your fight or flight response, because you have to, okay? What Steve found, I should just point out, the other things that for mammals is they all respond to melody as socially engaging and safe. Every culture in the world has lullabies. And every mammal responds to high-pitched sounds as threats. So if a child falls over, scrapes their knee, screams, everybody looks. You might not interact because of social constraints, especially if you're a guy, but you can't not check it out, all right? This is where cats have evolved to be very smart. They mimic the frequencies of human babies, and you can't not feed the cat.
Yes. Yes.
Someone feed the cat. All right, frequencies. So frequencies are so important to mammals. This is another way that we work out. Plus, your ears are never turned off. When you're asleep, if a pack of wolves walk into the camp, you will wake up. So what Steve did is he developed, he wrote some algorithms. It took Took some 13 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
Those algorithms strip out a lot of the base frequencies, those predator frequencies,
Yeah.
and start to re-educate the person's auditory processing system. Well, why is that a problem? Because we know that people that have a history of otitis media, that's ear infections, have a predisposition, if they get enough of them, because of the damage that's actually done,
Mm.
they have a predisposition to hearing more effectively,
Mm.
more predominantly in that low flat frequency range.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 28% of people on the autism spectrum have otitis media, have issues with their hearing,
Yeah.
and lots of ear infections.
Yeah.
But we found that also to the kids that grow up in trauma, in households with angry dads, their ears reconfigure to hear a drunk, angry dad coming until they get under the bed, in the cupboard, out the window. They hear the low flat frequencies sooner, up to 30 times better they hear in this frequency range, because it becomes adaptive. That's a terrible thing when you're in classroom trying to listen to a female teacher who's got beautiful melodic voice, and you can't get your head away from the air conditioning
Yeah.
or the trucks that are going up and down because your school is near a highway,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or even a blowfly, for God's sake. Anything that's in that low flat frequency range gets picked up by your oversensitive
Yeah.
auditory processing system.
Mm-hmm.
So the Safe and Sound protocol is basically, it's a selection of contemporary music and kids' music that's had this filter applied to it to actually remove a lot of their low bass frequencies and then systematically add it on in a measured, very brilliant way.
Mm.
It helps the system, that helps the nervous system have little moments of safety,
Mm.
which over the time, 30 minutes a day of protocol it is,
Mm-hmm.
for 10 days, but then you can extend it out. You're re-educating, you're re-helping the interface between the vagal nerve, the tympanic tensor muscle, all
Mm-hmm.
the things that modulate sound, to more normalize.
Mm.
People that typically have this problem will have troubles emotionally regulating when they're in chaotic noise environments. Think shopping malls, think of the
Mm-hmm.
school playground when people are
Mm.
running around, school assembly times.
Mm-hmm.
These people that have this profile will go to a pub and they really want to listen to this really interesting person's conversation, but because of the chaos around, they got to get out of there.
Mm.
They're irritated. Whereas a regular normally can screen it all out and focus.
Mm.
So the Safe and Sound protocol was designed to help manage those auditory hypersensitivities. In the process of that, clinicians discovered that it actually works not just for kids on the spectrum, but for trauma, for anybody who's got a dysregulated nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've even started using it now as part of the protocol for building safety prior to processing trauma in EMDR.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so a typical example was I was working with a client, did some EMDR, processed a traumatic event, her sleep got disrupted, which sometimes happens.
Mm-hmm.
And after a few nights of this, I said, you know what? You used the SSP last year. Why don't we just try that?
Mm-hmm.
She was actually in the clinic room and very, very fatigued. We put the music on. She fell asleep in the chair like within like 1.5 minutes. And I said, right. She went home. She redid a section of the protocol. The trauma integrated, sleep returned. She was fine. We just had to give her nervous system a little nudge to feel safe again, so that she could continue the processing work of the scary stuff.
Yeah.
So it's another beautiful gift. And there's Porges' seminal work was the 2014 study. So for the science boffins out there, you can look that up, and it was a beautiful double-blind study. But there's more research going on now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's so that's the Safe and Sound protocol in a nutshell.
And we'll put all the links to SSP, the website, and the practitioner resource list, and Stephen Porges' 2014 work in the show notes, so people can find this and geek out on it themselves. The SSP is it's that deceptively powerful thing that I have not experienced myself, but everyone who was at the conference was very much blown away just in their clinical practice. They just, it's phenomenal what this work can do. And I think it's really interesting because, again, we're beneath the layers of cognitive. Let's think about the trauma. Let's talk about the trauma. We are way away from that. And we're just helping brains and therefore nervous systems recalibrate. And that's such a service. So yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you a link to, I did a presentation at the International Children's Conference in Melbourne in August, and I talked about some of the therapeutic outcomes of the SSP.
Great.
So it was only done on an iPhone. It's not that high tech, but it's you get a sense of
it, yeah.
Of some of the outcomes that kids and adults have had using the SSP and also a polyvagal framework.
Yeah.
So that's fine. But so to come back to the book then.
Yes.
Well, the thing is, what frustrates me is I'm just a bucket carrier. What does that mean? Well, if you had a village, and there's another story about the village that this guy, he used to bring the water to the village every day, one bucket at a time.
Yeah.
All right. And he'd get his family involved and they'd go and everybody loved the service. It's very, very slow, but it's one at a time. Then this guy turned up and says, you know what, we're going to build a pipeline, a pipeline from the lake. You can have unlimited water 24/7. Well, the bucket carrier got really, really stressed. So he started to get more family members, carry more buckets. But eventually the pipelines were built and people had water to their house. Working as an individual clinician, I'm a bucket carrier. I can work with one bucket, one person suffering at a time.
Yeah.
Through a book, though, I thought I can create a bigger ripple effect. And it will create opportunities to speak, which is the other thing I want to do. I want to actually have that opportunity to actually touch more people's lives in one go. So I wrote the children's book because, first of all, we made sure that every page of it drips in polyvagal theory.
Yeah.
So getting the sense of compassion between a dad and a daughter to help her feel safe during a thunderstorm.
Yeah.
Helping little Chloe to understand that her body betrays her when she freezes doing her times table in front of the class. It's not her fault. When her peers laugh at her and then she has rage and then runs out of the room, so there's your fight or flight response. It's not her fault. When she began to understand that, she was not only greatly relieved, we started to actually make therapeutic progress with her. So she does the safe and sound protocol. She learns heart math. She learns how to breathe. She learns how to blow bubbles. So again, I should point out that's a critical component of polyvagal theory. As you breathe in, heart rate goes up. As you breathe out, heart rate goes down. Your body's so brilliant that when you're stressed, you sigh. That's a short in-breath, a long out-breath. The people with the best heart rate variability in the world sing professionally or play wind instruments in orchestras. Therefore, when you teach a child with trauma or an adult to blow bubbles, they are practicing a short in-breath, long out-breath. So before that child's got to go to school or go to a scary thing, get out the $2.50 bubble kit, like blow some bubbles.
Yeah.
All right. Or sing a song and others. Like there's so many things you can do that leverage that breathing pattern. So that's what I look at in the book. So that, and as mum practices blowing bubbles with Chloe, she's calming herself down and she's co-regulating. So the book came about because I wanted to actually get that then into schools.
Yeah.
Just into facilities whereby teachers that can start to look at this, parents can start to look at this and understand that we've got to see kids and other human beings through a different set of eyes.
Yes. Yeah.
All right? It is not cause and effect. This is not a bad kid.
No.
No child wants to go to school and be in trouble.
No.
They want to go there and they want to fit in, they want to do their best. But their neurophysiology gets in the way. So if we understand that, we can create situations which help them feel safe.
Yeah.
So then I realized, like Steve came and actually watched the presentation in Melbourne, which was kind of interesting. It's like having Novak Djokovic come and watch you play tennis. Anyway, he liked that. That's why I went to the States, because he invited me to go there, which is where I met you, which is the beautiful flow of synchronistic world of the universe, right? I realized after that presentation that I've still got more to do. And that's, I'm writing now this companion book. So this is for the parents and teachers, the caregivers of kids and adolescents. I need to put me in a book.
Yes.
So people can actually read the book and go, oh, okay, this is why my child is freezing. This is why my child is shutting down, getting angry. This is what's going on. And I want to, in that book, it'll cover not only polyvagal theory, but also things like compassion.
Yeah.
I'm even going to reference a little bit of metabolic stuff because I just think it's critical. And we should start with kids and adolescents with their, having the right fuels. So I want to help parents feel safe, because parents don't feel safe. Teachers don't feel safe.
Yeah.
All right. If I can help them feel safe, they'll do a better job at getting better out of their kids.
Yeah.
And that increases the ripple effect. Yeah. That's the whole point of the book.
Yeah. And so, I love the book. I actually don't have my copy here today because I'm at the office, but the book is gorgeous. And also, I really love when people start with children. And I also love what you're saying in terms of we need to educate the parents, but I also love that we're starting already to help children not feel like they're the problem, because I think that's been the dominant narrative. It's like they're behaving badly, they're the problem, and everything that you speak about and everything that you demonstrate, it's very clearly that there is a problem, but is not the fault of the child. It's their natural adaptive response. And that's what needs to change. And I adore the work that you do. And I really love that you want to, because I thought when I read the book, we need a companion guide to this in terms of we need like parents. So I love that you came up with that idea and I didn't need to tell you that we needed it. I think what I love about podcasts like this is that my listeners have heard my voice very little throughout this podcast, because you clearly have the gift of speaking, Paul, and you clearly can, but it's because you're enthusiastic, and I didn't need to insert questions. I didn't need to bring you back onto topic. And trust me, this is usually work, but I've just had to sit here and listen, which is awesome. And it allows me to really want to endorse your speaking, and the more that you can speak and the more that you can share, because it's so clear from the way you show up and the way you kind of enthuse about this, that this is really a passion for you. So I'm so grateful that you shared all of that with us today. And really, I mean, it seems crazy given what I do, but I've never really done this is the basics of polyvagal theory, or this is the basics of the triune brain, or this is what SSP is. And you've done it all in one podcast, which is awesome.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, however, again, and we're back to the original question you asked about serving. And so this is how I serve. And wherever this goes and however it works and whatever life it touches, so be it. And that's this is my legacy. This is something that happens as you get a bit older. You start to think about legacy. Oh, how do I help this world be a better place, right? And so books, presentations. Yeah. This is this next chapter in my life.
Thank you so much for sharing yourself with my listeners and with me today, Paul. I have really enjoyed that conversation. And even though I know the theories, I've really enjoyed just the way you touch on, dance through them. It's beautiful. And I really love this legacy that you're going to be leaving. And anything that the Unveil listeners think of and want to help Paul with, just reach out. I have some very interesting listeners, and I will put all of Paul's contact details in the show notes so that people can reach out and help spread his message throughout the world. Because even though he is sitting in Australia at this moment in time, on Monday morning, even though it's Sunday evening for me, which is very strange. We're literally not in time at this moment in time. he does travel, and I loved spending time with him actually in Florida. And so that's why I invited him to come on this podcast. So thank you so much for your time today, Paul. And I will let the listeners know where they can find you in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to share with my listeners today?
No, just be kind to each other, and let's help this world to be a better place. And thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, pleasure, Paul. Thank you. I love it when I get a podcast guest who is so clearly in their element and in the zone of being entirely passionate about what they're discussing and how they serve their clients and the world at large. If you have any interest in anything that Paul mentioned, including his book, we have linked these in the show notes for you now. Go find Paul online, and if you are an Australian listener, and I know that we do have some of those, please feel free to look him up, and I'm sure Paul will be back over in the US soon. All right, for now, take care of yourselves, be a little bit kinder than you might think is necessary, and I will speak to you next time on the Unveil podcast.